Ladies and gents, this is your Cape County Coroner who's made time to come with you, or come be with you today, and he's going to share about his experiences and let it rip.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
So let me ask a question. Who here knows what a coroner does? Okay. What is it? Okay, yes and no. So I do all what you mentioned. I don't perform autopsies myself. What happens is we use a forensic pathologist to do those for us, because I'll tell everybody I'm not a doctor. Did not go to medical school. My background is mortuary science. But you are correct. So basically any unexpected, unattended death, they call me. On top of that is a doctor, which I know you guys, this is Club Med, so future medical professionals here. A doctor can only sign a natural death certificate, which means if someone's taken to the hospital with a gunshot, car accident, suicide, overdose, things like that, it automatically reverts to me. So what sets me up to be able to do my job is what's this slideshow I put together, and I've got ADD, so it's kind of all over the place, but my main laws I follow is in Missouri State Statute, Chapter 58. And there's a list in here of other people's, but anything related to Chapter 58, it just strictly involves the coroner's office. So a little history about my position. It actually predates back to the 1100s, 1400s, depends on your source. Most people do believe it's the 1100s. You guys ever heard of Sheriff of Nottingham, Robin Hood? So that was the start of the coroner's position, was to be a tax collector. Coroner, I believe the actual term stands for the crown. And what that means was, back in the old days, taxes was everything. Even if you committed suicide, you had property, the royal family of your area would get your property, because that was acts against the crown. That's what we investigate. So like homicides, things like that. A lot of people don't know I am the highest ranked elected official in the county, which means one of my jobs is to oversee the sheriff. I'm the only person in the Cape Girardeau County, if ever need be, that could arrest Sheriff Dickerson if she would break the law. I don't think we have to worry about that, but it's kind of with checks and balances to make sure, especially dealing with homicides, I have the final say on everything. And this goes into the Constitution of 1820. It did require a coroner and sheriff in each county. That remained until 1976, when the first medical examiner's office was put in, and that was put in St. Louis. Now it's split up. You have St. Louis County, Springfield's under a medical examiner, and a new thing that's starting to happen is some larger counties are combining with other counties to have like a shared medical examiner system. That could happen to Cape sometime. I like to think that I'm the person that's stopping that, because if anyone is familiar with what happened last year with the previous coroner, it did almost get to a point to where they removed the coroner's office from Cape County altogether and put an ME system in place. Two parts of my job is ministerial and judicial. And what that means is, the judicial part is so I tell everyone when I get on scene, I'm starting off with a theory. What my job is to do it correctly is I have to prove that theory. Then what I have to do is the information I found, it's my job to notify next of kin when somebody passes away. So I have to think of a way to explain it to them, kind of like bedside manner, as if you guys going into the medical field will know. You never have to reword anything, but how you present it to the family is very important. I'm the person that's making sure that they get their closure, whether it be an elderly person that has fallen at home, passed away from a heart attack, or if somebody commits suicide. I have to determine how to break the news to them, not just the most gentlest way, but also they know everything that I know. So you kind of have a split there, to where conversation I have with the police department might be completely different in terms of how we're speaking compared to the family. So this just goes into how this is kind of what happened last year. I can be impeached, is how I get removed from office. As I tell people, a lot of elected officials will say that the taxpayer is their boss, but me, I'm different. I say everybody in the county is my boss, including you guys, because those of you that are under the age of 18, if something happens to you, don't matter what it is, I have to get involved one way or another. But most of you people don't pay taxes, but still, I do my job for you folks. And when you pass away, I tell people my job is to represent the dead. when you die, there's a story to be told, and it's my job to make sure that that story is not only found out, but spread to those that need to know in a truthful manner. Okay. This just goes over Missouri State Statute. Chapter 56 is the prosecutor, Chapter 57 is the sheriff, and then Chapter 58 is the coroner. And so if you ever have any questions about authority or things like that, it is pretty interesting to read through those, and you just see what I'm allowed to do and what I'm not allowed to do, essentially. With my job, since I'm recognized, so just since I'm elected as a coroner, just if I leave Cape County, I don't lose any authority. If I would be in another county and come across someone that was deceased, I have control of that person until the correct coroner from that county responds on scene. Because again, my authority is not just recognized in Cape Girardeau County, it's through the whole state. So we do protect constitutional rights, Fourth Amendment, search and seizure. So when there's a person that's deceased, and you have, say for instance, here in Jackson, you have Jackson PD and the fire department. When that person is declared J4, which is the term used over the radios of this person's deceased, when I get there, that is my scene, which basically means no one outranks me. Anything that gets done as far as photographs or moving of the body, I have to authorize it first, which how this county is. I mean, we have great relationship now with all law enforcement agencies. We don't even have to communicate basically we don't have to throw any brass around. They know that they have a job to do, and then they know that I have a job to do. Typically on scene, they work a scene from the outside of a building in, where I start on the inside and work my way out. This just shows, again, state statute, chapter 58, just how the office is established, how it's filled, qualifications, pay, reimbursements, costs, and fees. So the first duty is, as it says here, conservator of the peace throughout the county, which means I have every bit of authority as a police officer does. The only thing that I cannot do is write a speeding ticket. Now, I do not, when I'm not on a call, I'm not out patrolling the roads or anything like that. That's strictly there just for checks and balances to make sure. So if somebody was getting questioned by the police and I'm walking by casually and I think their constitutional rights are being violated, then I can step in and say, nope, you need to basically stop this and intervene if I need to. So this is another state statute, legal definition of death. Basically, who can declare, determine, pronounce. Usually it's paramedic. There's obvious times before I'll get called, a police officer goes, and if it's a decomp case, I mean, if somebody is decomposing. And first off, I apologize if I'm too strict forward on the terms. I'm assuming with your guys' what you've been taught in here so far, you know things about like decomp, gunshot wounds, and things like that. So, so a lot of times, if it's a decomp case, they know they don't have to call the ambulance in to make sure, put an EKG strip on them or anything. So inquest is, we shall take inquest in violent and casual. So basically an inquest is kind of got two terms. For Chapter 58, it means an investigation. We do have the authority to do what is also called an inquest, and basically what that is it's like, imagine a court where I'm the judge. We do select 12 jurors, and the jurors which is basically saying it's the public makes a determination of death. And you would only do that typically for officer-involved shootings. If it's something questionable, it's also there to kind of protect me, to say if something happens and I truly don't know in an autopsy, don't know, then I can pass that on to you guys, the citizens, to help me determine what happened. So we all agree, so no one can say that anything was covered up, nothing dirty was done, and things like that. And a lot of this stuff is repetitive. Again, that's the ADD on me. Conservators of the peace, as I say, is only listed 8 times in our state statutes. Said military during emergency or while under direction of governor, police officers, marshals and city, sheriff and county judges, and courtrooms specific to law enforcement in Cole County. That's an example of, so if not only can I arrest the sheriff, but if I do have to arrest the sheriff, or if the sheriff unexpectedly passes away, then I become sheriff until the governor of Missouri can appoint a replacement. And again, that's just with the checks and balances of things to make sure that, not that in this area you have to really worry about any cops being dirty, as they say, but this is just something that our lawmakers in the previous years came up with to try and just keep things fair where there's never no questions about anything. And so this here goes, the conservative of the peace has a stronger authority than police officer and law enforcement officer. And again, it's strictly me protecting constitutional rights. This gives laws to sign a death certificate. I sign a lot of death certificates. With us having 2 major hospitals in our area, Missouri, how it works, so if somebody's brought down from Scott County and passes away at Mercy or St. Francis, I get the initial death report because they did die in our county. Then it's up to me. I have to reach out to their coroner and bring them up to date and basically revert the case back to them. However, we do get a lot of people brought over from Illinois, from the bridge, and I can't revert a case to another state because an Illinois coroner can't sign a Missouri death certificate, just like I can't sign an Illinois death certificate. So I have to assume the responsibility and investigation of all that too. So this is kind of interesting. When a death is presumed to have occurred within the state but the body cannot be located, a death certificate may be prepared by the state register upon receipt of an order of a court of competent jurisdiction, which shall include finding facts required to complete the death certificate. Such a death certificate shall be marked presumptive and show on its face the date of registration and identify the court and the date of decree. So I do have somebody that I'm waiting to get to the limit. State of Missouri is 5 years. Then if you're missing for 5 years, you can be declared legally dead. I've had a gentleman that basically just walked out of a nursing home, and then they had on camera of him walking towards the Mississippi River. He told people that that's what he intended to do. And so we're pretty confident that he succeeded in that. However, I got to wait 5 years before I can do anything on that because there was always that small chance he went a little bit down the river and got out and walked and just kind of went off into the sunset. So this is the basically when I need to be notified. Number 1, violence by homicide, suicide, or accident. And that goes back to saying where a doctor cannot sign anything other than a natural death certificate. Criminal abortions, including those self-induced, which criminal abortion is homicide, suicide. It could be anything from a car accident, basically death at the hands of another person. Now, just because I rule a death by a homicide on a death certificate does not mean charges will come from that. It's just if somebody is walking down the street and the person's driving down the road in the car and hits them, you think, is that an accident? Because they didn't intend to get hit by the car. However, they were killed by another person who used a vehicle that can be used as a deadly weapon. Now, it's not intentional, then there would be charges. But it's kind of things like that where determining the manner of death can kind of be tricky. And I've had many cases where I've called other coroners just to get their input because each call I go on, it's a different scenario. It's never the same call at all. And let's see. Unforeseen sudden occurrence and the deceased has not been attended by a physician during the 36-hour period preceding the death. So if I go on a call and there's an elderly person that had a heart attack, family says, she had congestive heart failure, arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease, things like that. If they had seen the doctor within the past 36 hours, then the doctor can sign that natural death certificate. Usually I don't push that because it's just as easy for me to get medical records and just do everything myself rather than have the family waiting for a death certificate. But there is a law there just because some coroners, they just don't like signing death certificates. I mean, I don't like it, but it's part of my job. And I'm the type of person, if I have something come across my desk, I like to be involved with it as much as I can rather than passing the buck on to somebody else. And so this says here, Chapter 58.4-51, police, sheriff, law enforcement officer, or any other person having knowledge of such a death shall immediately notify the coroner known facts concerning the time, place, manner, and circumstances of the death. Immediately upon receipt of notification, the coroner, deputy coroner shall take charge of the dead body and fully investigate the essential facts concerning the medical causes of death, including whether by act of man or manner of death. So that just goes into explanation of best scenario is if you have a person with a gunshot wound, let's say gunshot wound to the head, it's not the police department that determines if that's a suicide or a homicide. They are trained similar in ways that I am, but they don't have as much training as I do, being that they're having to learn all kinds of other stuff. Me, it's strictly investigation. So I've been trained by the state 3 times. I've also been certified through SLU, which is basically I've done for the state of Missouri the coroner training, but then I go through SLU. They do medical examiners. It's a little bit more difficult classes, but for me, the harder it is, the more interested I'm going to be in it, because we're dealing with science here, science and evidence and facts. So it's all, for me, my job's pretty straightforward most of the time. And this is, so I take names and addresses of witnesses to the death, file this information, take possession of all property we find on the body and make exact inventory, and shall direct a return of property to the person entitled to its custody. Then we should take possession of any object or article which me or my office's opinion may be useful in establishing the cause of death. So, and this is a law that don't really get enforced too much. So my office coroner's office is smaller than this room. I don't have an evidence locker, so if there's ever a weapon on scene, things like that, the responding law enforcement agency assumes possession of that, and that's just because for safety reasons they've got locks. I don't have locks. I typically just take driver's license and wallets. If there is another issue with the previous coroner, if there's any money, we photograph it. We have the law enforcement agency photograph it too, put it in our reports, and then what we do is I hold on to everything until I establish next of kin. Whoever next of kin is, that's legally their property. So we release the body to a funeral home of their choice and make sure that if we don't release the property on scene, that goes with the body. I don't know if anyone's ever told you this, but when you pass away, your next of kin, which for you guys would be your parents, they have you become what's called quasi property. The best way I can explain that is you're like a couch. You guys have a couch at your house. You don't have a deed, you don't have any title to that couch, but everybody knows it's yours, and that's how next of kinship works. Is the list starts with if you're an adult, are you married? Okay, no. So then it goes down to legal children. Okay, no. Then after that's parents, grandparents. Okay, and if they can't establish anything with them, then it comes to after 10 days, whoever wants to claim this person's body that's willing to pay for the funeral bill can assume the responsibility. Because the biggest thing for us is getting that person out of our office so that person can have the respectful burial or cremation. We do what's called indigence, which means after 10 days, if you're becoming indigent, it means you're unclaimed. Cape County kind of has a problem with that. I'm going on average 1 or 2 indigents a month. And basically what happens if nobody claims the person, then the county, I pick a random funeral home. I kind of have just a list that I go down. That way it's fair for everybody. And then the county will pay that funeral home a whopping $600 to have you cremated. And then once you're cremated, your remains are given back to me, and then you essentially go into a safe in my office that you're there forever, because at that point you are declared as property of Cape Girardeau County. And I've got about 30 cremation boxes in our office right now. And this just goes in if it's outside of a licensed healthcare facility. Healthcare facilities, as I said, they do call me if it's anything other than natural. But if somebody's inpatient, been in the hospital for weeks, say they got pneumonia or something, I don't get a call or anything on that. If you die at home on hospice, I do get typically a phone call, but state law is within 24 hours. I do have to get a faxed written notification of who you are, what you're on hospice for, next of kin, doctor signing a death certificate, and which funeral home you're going to, because it's very common that I'll get a hospice death or a nursing home death, and someone in the family will call me saying that, my mother was abused or neglected. And so there's many times where I go photograph and then look, and then what I do is I pass that on, usually Department of Senior Services, and just say, this is what's going on. Here's the information. I'll pass it on to you, and then we work together and determine if it is abuse or not. That's too long. Okay, so a coroner may autopsy. So I'm the only person in the county that can say yes to an autopsy, say we need to do one, at least at the expense of the taxpayer. The only person that can ever override me is a circuit judge. I don't know of that ever happening except one time, again, with the previous person. But so we have a budget. Our budget is $80,000 a year for our inquest, which is basically our autopsy and toxicology fund. There's a good chance I'm going to run out of that this year, just because that was based on the previous 4 years. Autopsies were hardly ever done. However, if I do run out of the budget for that, I can still order autopsies because, again, I'm the only person that has the elected or has the authority to do that. So if I do it, the county commissioners, honestly, they just have to pull the money out of the general fund because at the end of the day, I tell people I won't waste any money, but for my job, sometimes I just have to spend money on tox reports and autopsies just to make sure I get all the answers. So I can write my own writ of attachment, which, as you can see, can force compliance. So I'm the only elected official in the county, apart from a judge, that has subpoena power, which means if someone, and I actually was assisting another coroner from a different county, a local, I'm not going to say where, but a local doctor's office wouldn't turn over medical records to us. And he tried and tried and tried to get them to do it. And he called and said, can you help me out? Never had this happen. He's first year coroner like me, although I do have experience as a deputy. So I said, yes. So I called and I asked, well, why are you not giving these to the coroner? And they said, well, our lawyers have told us we can't do that because of HIPAA. Well, HIPAA does not pertain to coroners and medical examiners. We are excluded from that after somebody dies. Now, if you're still alive, naturally, I cannot go just get your medical records because you're still alive. But if it's a deceased person, when we send out a records request, best way to look at it is, I'm not saying it. Craig Williams is not asking for this. The state of Missouri is, because I represent not just the citizens, but the state. And when I need to do an inquest, I need this information to determine. With this case, it was the person died of cancer, but he didn't know for the death certificate the exact medical term. And they just were fighting, kicking and screaming, not giving that up. Well, I went down there and served him with the right of attachment with a subpoena and said, okay, you have 1 week to give this to me. If not, then the next time I come back, it's going to be with the sheriff's department and somebody's getting arrested. And that will make a lawyer give you what you want very, very fast. It's the only time I've ever had to do it. Most people St. Francis and Mercy, I'm on the phone with them every day. I just send a form to them, but sometimes in our job, we do have people that don't quite, and HIPAA is very tricky with hospitals because they're worried about turning any over kind of medical records because they don't want to get sued. But again, I guess it's something in law school that they don't all teach, that when a coroner asks for the records of a deceased person, you have to turn over everything that's within that written request. Child deaths, which I'm assuming is everybody here under the age of 18. Couple. Well, so if something happens to you guys, and I don't make this lightly because I just have a dark sense of humor, but it's all kinds of phone calls I have to make. I have to call Child Protective Services. I have to call Missouri Stat, which is they keep up with the statistics. I have to go to a child fatality review panel meeting, basically every couple months, depending on how many deaths I have. We get together, and for me, child deaths is typically infants in proper sleeping conditions. Something for you guys to think about. You become parents someday. You just need a blanket and a pillow. That's it, and a crib. Don't put a bunch of stuff in there to make them comfortable, because I'd say about 80% of my child deaths that I get is for that reason. But what we do is with the panel, our job is to, because at that point I've already determined cause and manner of death, we get together to see, okay, is there something we can do, community outreach, right, to prevent this? So case like that is, okay, how do we get to young women and young men that's having children at a young age to know, hey, Kid's not like a dog that you can have sleep in your bed. You know, like I said, it's usually overstuffed cribs, or sadly, parents sleep with a child and someone rolls over in their sleep, smothers the baby. It's very common. It's not an every month thing that happens in Cape Girardeau County, but I've seen it enough to know that it happens. Not saying that parents aren't at fault for that, but to me, it's an education thing. Best way I can put it is children having children, and I don't mean that as a disrespect to anybody. It's just doing things like that. It's easily avoidable. It's just some people just don't ever think that that would be possible. That's it for it. Like I said, I kind of threw that together. Does anybody have any questions for me about anything? I'm an open book on things I can discuss. I can tell you, I did spent my morning next to the Mississippi River today. We did find up in Alexander County, Illinois, there was a body floating down the river. So they had to call Cape Fire Department because they do have a Marine Rescue unit to go out there and bring this person to our shoreline. So since this guy was in the river, we know he's from St. Louis area, and so it happened last week. So I guess so you guys have a better understanding of how it works. Cape does get a lot of suicides from St. Louis, being that people jumping off bridges. It's very common. What happens is when you hit the water like that, wind gets knocked out of you. So what happens is you sink. Then as soon as you die, as I tell people, Mother Nature starts taking over. As you guys know about bacteria and everything. Bacteria within your body, even though you're not breathing no more, bacteria takes over. It's doing fermentation, as you know, without oxygen. Does anybody know what the byproduct of fermentation is? What's something that has to sit for a while before you can drink it? Okay, so there you go. So fermentation. So what happens is your body starts decomposing on the inside, your cells are making gas. And so what happens is it causes that person to bloat. And if you know anything about buoyancy, once you get enough, that person's going to come back up. And then when they come up, because a lot of times they'll get stuck under a log or something, they'll come back up to the surface and then they'll float down the river. And with how the time works with our location is, sadly, we just do get a lot of people that go into the river. Now, there's other things that can happen where they get found either before Cape County or after Cape County, but we're kind of just in that part where typically just under a week. If everything works right with the current and everything, they'll sadly float our way. And then, so that's the most recent case that I've had today. Still waiting on family notification, but it's just things like that. I woke up this morning not knowing. I thought I was going to have an easy, slow day, and then my phone starts ringing, and that's how my days typically go. So telling him, I told him I'd love to be here today, but I can't always guarantee I can be somewhere because I have 2 deputies, but if it's like a violent or just an unusual death, I make sure that I go on scene because you people, as the citizens, elected me to be coroner. So anything serious, not saying that I don't take death serious, but homicides, things like that, I make sure to make note that if I can be there, I'm there, just so I'm representing everybody to make sure that, hey, you voted me in for this job. I'm not just doing it just to have the title. But does anybody have any questions about anything?
Yeah, I've got several.
Okay.
All right, we start at the top. So let's say this guy from St. Louis that you're talking about that came out of the river today.
Mm-hmm.
So can he be processed by the Cape County coroner even if he's not from Cape County? So
yes, I should have clarified. If he would have, so everything with this guy speaks St. Louis, Illinois. If it would have been St. Louis, Missouri, I would have done the removal, but then all my information would went up to the medical examiner's office. But since he was everything, we cannot. I'm trying not to give too much away because there's a separate article out about this person right now, but there's evidence that he never got to the Missouri side. He just ended up in Cape Girardeau when they brought him back. And that was since it's always where they end up is the place of death. So it's okay. Cape Girardeau.
So even though he definitely would have died in St. Louis and you got him days later,
mm-hmm.
It's where they're found.
It's where they're found. So on a death certificate, time of death. So if somebody say they died last week and they get found today, their time of death on the death certificate is today's date at the time that I pronounce them. We can do things to figure out how long someone's been deceased, but that's more just for information to get our timeline together. However, time of death is always when they were found. So our death certificates have a part that you can click found on it, so the state knows he was deceased beforehand, but this is just when everything happened.
For something like that, would they have to investigate if it was a homicide or a suicide, or would they have to try to figure out if there was foul play involved?
Yeah, so this person, he will be autopsied later this week.
Okay.
And that is typically if this person had some involvement with the police that led up to this. So we do, pardon my language, CYA autopsies, which is cover your ASS. And what that is I'll do an autopsy sometime just to make sure if there's any questions of a doubt of something being wrong or not. If I just cannot give all the answers, I say, look, I'm having a forensic pathologist step in. He is obviously way more qualified than I am in terms of pathology. So we do that to just ensure where I can say I'm doing everything that I can. If there's any questions, then if court dates come up, lawsuits, they talk to him, not me. And again, that's with the facts, protecting the facts and protecting that story to make sure that the most qualified person is taking charge of things.
Got a couple more questions.
Go ahead.
All right. So you said $80,000 roughly is what you're looking at for all of your tox screens and autopsies. If you can't answer this, that's fine. But what does a tox screen cost on average, and what is
toxicology screen cost us around $250?
Okay.
A full autopsy costs, depending on the cause of death, because if it's like a house fire death, there's additional testing that labs have to do, but it's about $2,300 to $2,600.
Okay.
Now, if you are under 18, the state does pay for it, so there's no charge to the county. But that's one of those. So if you're under 18, or if it's a homicide, then it's by law I have to do an autopsy. We don't get reimbursed for homicides, but child deaths we typically do. And of course, with those is I do an automatic autopsy not just because I have to, but when you're dealing with a child, I don't skip any steps on that.
And then you said that if it's an elderly person that dies, in hospice or in a care facility, and their family says, "Oh, we think they were abused or neglected," that you investigate that. Mm-hmm. What are you looking for, or can you tell us?
Typically, bruising. I'm looking at two things. I'm looking for bruising on them to see if there's obviously abuse. And then neglect is if they're emaciated, undernourished, things like that. We move the body around. We check for bed sores. If you're in a nursing home, you're not supposed to have any bed sores because the staff is supposed to be actively moving you every day to stop that. Typically, a lot of my abuse cases that I've noticed is you have elderly, it's typically a mother, say in her upper 80s, and she lives with her daughter, who's supposed to be her caregiver. However, the sad part is the daughter has mental challenges. And what it is they have that bond where they've lived together forever, and the mother don't want to have the daughter by herself because, sadly, there's a lot of elderly that's getting taken care of by their children who honestly just can't take care of themselves. I've been on a call where I went to a house and there was this elderly lady that was laying in not just her own fecal matter, but cats. And the house was just a wreck. And it's got a hold of social services and say, this is an abuse or neglect case, but I'll explain it's like it's a neglect case, but the daughter can't take care of herself. So it wasn't out of spite or being evil. It's just, and I see the same thing with child deaths too. I'll tell everybody this. Me personally, this is opinionated, so don't hate me for it, but our country has a huge mental health crisis right now. There's just all kinds of people that have mental problems. the houses I've been into, have you ever heard of a hoarder before? So I've been in houses to where the only way to get those people out of the house was to have the fire department cut a hole in the wall because we just couldn't get to them. I mean, it's houses you'll drive by, you'll think, oh, that's a beautiful house. You step inside and it's like, oh my gosh. I mean, I've went home with fleas on me, all kinds of stuff. I was at a house the other day that I thought I was walking on a dirt floor. He had a dog that he never let outside. So the floor was just dog poop all over the place. My rule at the house is I have to keep my washer open because I'll come home and I'll just have stuff all over me that I just have to, even in the middle, like today, got him back, got everything processed, went home, took a shower because my job's not clean all the time.
Somebody's been in a river for a week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I tell people I've had worse. He was actually, luckily with the nights being cold.
Still cold, yeah.
The water was cold, so it did a pretty decent job.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's never good when I get called in the sense that it's never. Sometimes I'll have an elderly call. Well, they'll just say, Mom, Dad didn't want to go to the hospital. They weren't feeling good. And, it's not that anyone's happy, but it's an understanding. But I've done car accidents, suicides, homicides. I mean, those are never fun. I've had guns pulled on me before because when someone dies, I have to notify next of kin. My rule is if they die at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm not waiting until in the morning where they can hear it from somebody else or on the news. So I go knocking on doors 2 o'clock in the morning. No one's shot at me yet, so that's a plus. But I mean, and of course I can't get upset because someone is banging on my door at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to answer with a gun too because who's out in the neighborhood 2 o'clock in the morning. But it's like I said, I mean, as weird as it is, I love my job for many reasons. It's how I tell myself I could give back. My mother had her way. I would have been a doctor, but I did not pay attention in school. So medical school was not going to be a good thing for me because I just can't pay attention very well, which is, I think, why I do so good with this job is because it's always something different. And when I get on scene, I'll be quiet for like 10 minutes, but I'm having a conversation with myself, going through all kinds of different scenarios, thinking of training, thinking of lectures, tests I've taken, say, does this add up with this? And then finally, when I'm ready to speak, I say, okay, this is what we have. But
I'll let them ask some questions
yeah.
too, because I have more, but I don't want to monopolize all of your time.
No. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. So death certificates, everything I do is public record. We have a website called Moever, and like anything that's ran by the government, it's outdated and slow. But I do it online because what it is once I release somebody to a funeral home, it's the funeral home's responsibility to give me their vital statistics, which is questions that aren't really important to me, but I need to know. Well, not really that I need to know, but things like where they were born, the name of their parents, highest level of education, things like that. So the funeral home gets that information. They put it on the program it sends to me. And then what I do is I fill out that death certificate online once I have all my adequate records. And then I release it, and it sits in the queue for like 6 hours. And then once it's released through the queue, if I signed a death certificate, Cape Girardeau County, you can go to any health department in the state of Missouri, and then they can print a death certificate off for you. So they used to have long form, fill them out by hand. That was horrible because you guys will learn when you start working for doctors. Doctors have horrible handwriting. See, I've got the handwriting of a doctor, just not the mental capacity. But I've had them back in the old days because I've been in this industry. I've started out in funeral service since 2011. There was doctors that would fill them out by hand and you couldn't read it. So now at least with everything, it spell checks it. Make sure you do it right because if not, if I ever have to make it a correction or amend a death certificate, that's a 3-month process to get done. And that's just because that's how backdated this, Jefferson City is with death certificate corrections. Because you have funeral homes misspelling names all the time or putting the wrong date in, and they just get so many of those that it's best to do it right the first time. So, yes, ma'am. I would say no. Now, there is more in Cape County than almost more. I mean, how do I put this? Homicides typically happen in poverty areas and heavily populated area. We kind of have both. I've noticed they've slowed down, honestly, and this is not to make a joke of it, but they closed the strip club down across the river. That's where a lot of homicides used to happen because you have people going down there. What kept those places alive was before, up until this year, state of Illinois, you didn't have to close a bar down at 1:30. So you'd have a lot of people that would go downtown Cape, and then they would go down across the river to the strip club, not just to see dancers, but because it was another bar that was open up late. Well, typically when you have alcohol involved, and almost everybody carries a gun these days, you will have some type of altercation that someone gets shot. But since they've shut that down, honestly, knock on wood, that it's been pretty slow. Trying to think. I think I had one homicide in January. I had one in February, but the one in February was a baby, and it was a neglect case. But for that, I have to roll that as a homicide because neglect from the mother. It's your job to protect. You are the protector. You are the keeper. You don't do your job, then it can't be an accident because, well, I don't want to go into detail on that one. Yeah. But for Cape, no, I would say Cape County is safe. I mean, southeast Missouri is really safe. Most shootings happen, honestly, in Sikeston, Charleston, and Crothersville. And with how those work, thankfully for me for this law, if someone is shot, brought to Cape, they die in Cape County, I get notified of it, but I don't have to do an autopsy or nothing because I call the coroner where the incident happened, and then they have to assume responsibility. But yeah, no, it's not like St. Louis. It's typically, most of my homicides is usually over drugs, so just don't do drugs. That's the best. That's the best thing I can say to you guys is don't get involved in that lifestyle because Cape does have an issue with, we're right between St. Louis and Memphis and not too far from Chicago, so we do have a couple gangs that look at the interstate of Cape as like a pipeline for drugs. Butler County has it worse than anybody, but that's typically, again, pardon my language, but our saying is you get murdered over two things, ass or assets. It's usually somebody fighting over a woman or a boyfriend, or it's typically drugs or money. Yep. And again, I know you guys are kids, but you're old enough to hear me talk, and you're old enough to hear what comes out of my mouth. Any other questions?
You said the paramedic will have to do an EKG sometimes to determine death. Can an EMT do that, or is that only something the paramedic?
Yes, EMT, paramedic. Typically, as I tell people in our county, you want the fire department before you see an ambulance because they are more trained. Not knocking CCPA or anything like that. It's just firemen. Firemen don't get a lot of credit for how many different things they do. I mean, it's everything from recovery, fires naturally, but medical-wise, I mean, those guys are constantly running in not just Jackson, but Cape everywhere. But yes, and because a lot of times if someone gets found cardiac arrest or they collapse, they have to work them 17 minutes, which CPR for 17 minutes. And that's usually where EKGs come in, where they're pumping, injecting them medicine, trying to get a heartbeat back, and that EKG is clinical death, so they know, okay.
17 minutes based on, is that like a state law or state rule? Or?
I believe so. It's not anything I've ever been told, but I just know that that's what they all say, 17 minutes. And when I'm on the radio, they'll say your 17 minutes is up, and then they say, okay, we have to call it. Because after 13 minutes, and if you don't have oxygen, then you're declared brain dead at that point, so.
In a typical month, how many do you see?
Yes. So my schedule, I've been doing something different every day this month, but month of January, I had 70 deaths come through my office, and the month of February, I had 65. But
there's 3 of you that can process those?
Yes, and a lot of those is hospice notifications. However, I have to include those because how the law is, if I get a piece of paper if someone died and there's a name, date, time of death, all that, I've taken an inquest. I've investigated it because I've read through it. So we do include I do include those in ours. But that's more just so people know how many people are dying outside of a hospital facility.
Do you have to go to every one, or do your deputies, can they handle them start to finish?
Hospice deaths we'd only go on if they suspect neglect or something like that. And typically they just call them the hospice nurses, who is a job I could never do. As I tell people, the thing about my job, when I get on scene, someone's deceased. It is sad, yes, but they're not suffering anymore by the time I get there. Hospice nurses have to be there all the way to the end. Um, but no, but so if it's just a natural hospice death, it's usually just a phone call, give me a heads up, and then they usually that day or the next morning fax me a face sheet with all the information so I can keep up with the statistics of everything.
Anybody else?
Yes, ma'am. So y'all tell you, well, you know what I did? I won a popularity contest. That's essentially to be a coroner. Have to be 18 or it's either 18, 21 years old. I'm 36, so I didn't pay attention to that part. Be within good standing of the county and live in the county for 6 months prior before you sign up. Me personally, it started out mortuary science. So I'm a licensed embalmer. I have a mortuary service in Cape. Good thing about my setup, I cannot get ever accused of conflict of interest because how my licensing for my mortuary setup, I can only assist funeral homes. I cannot assist the general public. But my mortuary science degree, it goes into basically anatomy, pathology. I essentially, 2 years I was in there was in RN classes. The last semester, it's where I split to embalming courses, but I'm not medical background by any means, but it's mostly medical classes, theories and things like that.
So you still do, on top of being a coroner, you still do embalming and stuff?
Yep.
Wow.
That's
a lot.
I don't have a lot of free time, but I figure bust my butt in my 30s, start slowing down in 40s, and my 50s, we'll see. But yeah. And I'm also fifth generation funeral professional in my family on my mother's side. And my dad was a casket salesman for 43 years. So I literally grew up around that. And that's why I would tell people it doesn't really bother me. I probably need to see a therapist. I don't. But like I said, the ministerial part of it, I started off out of high school at SEMO, was business management, some general business that I can't even remember. That was like the 60s for me. But I kind of had this day, came through to myself one day, said, what can I do to get back? And my brother said, would you be a good funeral director? And I said, okay. So I just started there, and I get bored real easy doing something. So I just kind of turned that into, okay, I got my funeral director license, got my embalmer's license, basically became manager of a funeral home, then got to the point where I was ready to go out on my own. And then opportunity came up to be a deputy coroner. And then when the stuff happened last year, the sheriff came to me and basically said, I don't know how to be a coroner. You do. Can you come back and help me out? I said, yep. And then I decided, well, I got all that mess fixed up from the previous person. I didn't want to see somebody else come in and not take the glory, but come in and mess up everything, because I established a reporting system and everything and decided to run. So I ran in the election last year and won. It's me and 5 other people. But
if you had to hire a deputy today, what would you be looking for in that person?
One of 2 things, either law enforcement background or a medical background, because both of those are essential. Said me, I take advantage of the fact that our county is very pro training. So I'm in training classes all the time. But one of those 2 things, funeral industry has always been, especially in the state of Missouri, there's to this day, the majority of the county coroners are funeral professionals. And it's just always evolved into that. I mean, you have to think 60 years ago, your funeral homes had ambulances. You didn't have ambulance services like you did. It was modified hearses. But for me, typically, it's kind of 2 different sides of the same story. Law enforcement agencies are really good for violent deaths to figure out, okay, this is the gun, we located the shell casing, where medical professional is somebody that's in their 60s just dropped dead. Do you guys know the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic factors. No, so extrinsic is outside the body, intrinsic is on the inside. So law enforcement officer, if they have blunt force trauma, things like that, are very good at seeing that. However, intrinsic factors is medical professionals because they can understand, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, coronary artery disease. Yeah, they probably had a massive heart attack or stroke. But so it just depends. It's all over because we don't just get one specific type of death. We get all of them. So. Yes, ma'am. He's waiting to get sentenced next week. He got found guilty of 3 felonies and a misdemeanor. And I'm not trying to throw him under the bus. Just facts are facts. He had the trust of the people and he misused it, so he made his bed. But
can we ask what the felonies were? Because those are public record now, aren't they?
Yeah, no. So what it was misdemeanor was he stole money, $17 out of a dead guy's wallet. Don't ever do that. Don't steal anything. I'm going to tell you this right now. You don't ever steal anything from a dead person because that's bad luck. 2 things you don't do with a dead person. You don't steal from them, and you don't put them in an unmarked grave. Okay, I'm not going to say believe in ghosts and all that stuff, but I don't risk it. So that's 2 things. And the 3 felonies that he got charged with was, frankly, he was putting a heart attack on every single death certificate. So it don't matter how you die, you're going to die because your heart stops beating, cardiac arrest. That's what he did. And one that got him in trouble, or one of them, was a young person that committed suicide, used sodium nitrate. You want to know what sodium nitrate is? It's a food preservative. And what its job is to do for food is it eliminates oxygen. It's a common way for people to do it. He used that to commit suicide, left everything from a suicide note, left samples, left his computer open with his notebook on the side that said, "This is what I did." Went as far as was wearing a diaper, because when you die, if your bowels are full or your bladder, that's coming out because your sphincters are going to release. And so I deal with a lot of poop and pee in my job. But he put heart attack. And he was in his lower 30s, and lower 30-year-olds, you don't have heart attacks. But it was just things like that. That's why the state of Missouri, which I don't know how the death certificates went through, but anytime I get a death in the ER, it's cardiac arrest or cardiopulmonary arrest. You can't put that on a death certificate unless etiology's listed, which is the things that led up to it. But he just put it on everything. He didn't even investigate. He didn't want to order autopsies because my understanding was, of course, he ran again, but he was going to say how much money he was saving the county through stuff. But I tell people I don't waste any money, but if something happens to you or one of your family members, there's certain things I have to do just to get the answers. And so I tell people that's why we pay taxes. It's, again, none of it's wasted, but sometimes we do have to spend money to get some additional answers because I can't figure everything out on my own. But anyone else? No?
Thank you, Mr. Williams. We
Yeah.
appreciate it.
No, thank you.